Hello, welcome to the first module of Mentoring Tourism Microentrepreneurship. The first module addresses kind of an overall framework of destination planning on how to make tourism in a destination benefit all the residents and be competitive. And we created a model for that called Permatourism. So I'm going to explain it kind of in that context for this module. Okay, so many of us have looked at tourism over time. So if you read tourism literature, you'll find like studies criticizing that usually tourism tends to be from top down, where like outside companies and maybe even NGOs, they see a region and they think that tourism can develop there. So either for like some kind of purposes of theirs, like making profit or conserving history or natural resources, they bring tourism and shove it down the throats of the locals, convince them that they want to do that. And that usually has not worked very well. And then other people have kind of tried to find an alternative for that, and they think of this bottom-up grassroots approach that they come and they develop capacity among the locals, and that hasn't really worked always very well. Generally, it hasn't worked very well. The locals, they develop skills and stuff, but then their companies, their community as a destination can't really integrate into the international tourism retail supply chain. And so they are not competitive, they're not getting visitors, they're ready for them, and they know what they want to provide them, but nobody can really find them. So this kind of thing also has happened in other places, and generally, I've learned a while back, and I passed it on to my students, that if you have a complex problem, it may help to look at a different context and see how they solved kind of a similar kind of problem, and then try to bring their lessons in. So in agriculture, they faced this. You know, there was the commodity farming, and there's the small-scale farming, traditional subsistence farming, and none of those are very, very good. So the idea of permaculture emerged to try to kind of figure out a compromise, a hybrid between the two. And so there's, you know, permaculture is a very complex way of thinking and a process and a philosophy, etc. And there's many, many books, but I'll try to kind of give you a little succinct description of kind of what we care about. One of them is that permaculture is about putting the pieces together in a farm, in a field, so that all of these pieces, like the trees and the chickens and the livestock and the vegetable garden, they all kind of are symbiotic with each other. That way you don't have to put as much fertilizer and herbicides and things like that, because this ecosystem is working really well on its own, like one thing compensating for the other, right? And so that's like, you know, borrowing from crop science and things like that, they've figured these things out, okay? Another thing is that the farm is very diversified. So it's the opposite of a monoculture perspective. So in a monoculture perspective, if there's a plight, they lose all the crops. But in permaculture, they believe in diversification of production. That way, if one year the season for wine is really bad, but you know the peaches are really good, and if the vegetables, the green vegetables, are not doing well, some other vegetable is doing really well. And so one thing, you know, it helps the farm go with the ebbs and flows of just the climate and the markets and things like that. And then the other cool thing is that, you know, doing it this way, on one hand, it saves costs. It makes the farmer not spend as much money in fertilizer and plowing, and which means diesel and things like that. So they have to do less, so they have less costs. And then their product is value added because it's organic and desirable and kind of earthy and hippie, you know, and the market wants those kinds of things. So they can charge more for their product, and they have to spend less to produce it. So it makes business sense. It's not just kind of a pie in the sky ideology. So we're trying to figure out how we can adapt this. So the cool thing is that that concept did originate in agriculture, but it's been now applied to many, many contexts, especially complex human and social systems. And so permaculture is a permanent design. It's a permanent culture. It's a way of thinking about doing things, designing things so that they take care of themselves. And they don't need a lot of intervention and all of these other things I mentioned about permaculture in the context of agriculture. So as you can see there in the slides, it's been applied to building designs and to town planning and to water supply systems, and we started applying it to tourism. So what is permatourism? It's like a holistic approach to tourism planning to understand how tourism can be leveraged to produce equitable and sustainable development in a host community. And it leverages the permaculture design principles. So, for example, it advocates symbiosis, the connections between formal and informal sector. And we'll talk more about formal like restaurants and hotels and informal like micro-entrepreneurs, which is a topic of this course. And it either leverages the market or subverts the market. So subvert is a word we like to use because we're not resisting or being revolutionaries. We're making the system feel that we're going along with it, but we really have a hidden agenda that is helping the community. So that's why we use the word subvert. And it promotes reconciliation, because in many communities, tourism is imposed on the locals and they resist it. And you can see, Google over tourism if you would like, and look at graffiti over tourism. You see locals doing graffiti in the walls protesting against tourism in their community. So we're trying to still be market-driven, still be conscientious of the economic development imperative, but do it in a way that reconciliates, brings the locals along again and listens to them and tries to realign the two things. Okay? And we try to do this in a very savvy way by creating partnerships in which several stakeholders, several groups can benefit. So can we think of something that makes hotels happy because it makes them get more visitors and maybe be very appealing because they look like they're community conscious, and also some restaurants, but also some guides, and also a historic society. And so if we can get a lot of these stakeholders collaborating with each other, even those that don't even seem to be related to tourism, now they're all making money from this economic muscle of tourism, and then that will create that reconciliation between them. So in the farms, the several components I mentioned, like the chickens and the cabbages and the trees, they're put in certain places, kind of in a concentric disposition, so that certain things are closer to the farmhouse, some things like trees and orchards are further away. So in tourism, we also think of these zones, like the garden and the livestock area and the forest area, but here we call them anchor attractions at the very center, local government and civic organizations, formal private sector like hotels and restaurants, micro-entrepreneurs, which are these informal locals that provide experiences and maybe lodging, and then the local people. All right? And they don't have to be geographically in a very organized way, but they do have to have some, we need to consider a little bit their position in relationship to each other. Okay? So there's a long scholarship and kind of a how-to knowledge on the application of this process to agriculture, and we're starting to develop it into tourism. So we've adapted the principles from agriculture to the context of tourism, and in Moodle there's a handout, a one-sheet handout, where we have this table with each of these principles and their explanation. And as you can see, there's 12 of them, and I have 3 to share with you today just to give you an example to familiarize you with them. So the first one I want to share is the principle of obtaining a yield. And so that stands for ensuring that community partners that we're working with, they are getting short-term rewards for their partnership with you. Right? So when you start doing this kind of work, a permatourism development project for a community, you need to make sure that the people that you're working with are benefiting in the short term, so especially the ones that are kind of marginal incomes. And the example I have here for you is this work we're doing called Vacationer Supported Agriculture. We started in 2018 in the summer and working with farmers to sell bags of produce to people that come to North Carolina for like a week at the beach. And now the realties are telling them, hey, buy these bags of local produce from the farmers. So the first year, we're working with them, we're figuring these things out, we're learning about it, but that year, the farmers generated $5,000 of income. And then last summer, 2019, we refined the process, we worked in more places, more destinations, they made $55,000. So each year we are working with these partners, but we are going to make sure that they do have the chance to earn income, because we're learning and we're trying to create suggestions for the future. We're becoming important and noticed by communities and our supervisors and our activity reports at the end of the year. Isn't it fair that the people we're working with that are sharing with us their insights and their lives, they're also benefiting directly, right? By the way, I wanted to mention at the bottom of these slides, this slide and the next two, there's a link to kind of detailed information about this. So if you click there, it gets to a report from last year where we, talk about how much money the farmers made and how the customers felt about it, so you can learn more about VSA. In this case, we'll talk to you about Fork to Farmer project, where we connect celebrated farmers or celebrated chefs with the farmers that supply produce to their kitchens. In this picture is Vivian Howard and Farmer Warren. They're kind of TV stars, so some of you may be familiar with them. And so this is an example of one of these pairs we work with, okay? So this example is to illustrate Principle 7, which says that you first, in permatourism, you can't just be detailed from the onset. You can't just go to the community and treat each community as a unique set. You need to step back and understand the market, understand social trends, and build your strategy on that backbone. And then from there, you try to find ways to leverage that mega trend with the local unique characteristics, right? So you have to kind of find the balance between these two things. And according to permatourism, you want to first design from the big patterns, from the big trends, and then work your way to the specificity of the community. You can't just apply the same solution to every community, but you should start from kind of a mega trend. In this case, it's the local foods movement and the emergence of foodies, people that care where their food comes from and what the farmer's name was and how he treated the chickens and things like that. All right, so look up on that website where you can learn about the project and see many of the videos we've made about these chefs. And then the third example I wanted to give you is to integrate instead of segregate, right? So you put many things in place, and like a farmer is very complex, it has many different components, and you find ways to integrate them all into a farm. And it's maybe like the profit generation, full-on capitalism. It's like focus on what you're good at, and you just buy whatever you are not the best at producing. But with permaculture and with permatourism, that's not the case. The community needs to have all of these kinds of components. You want to have them coexist. The example I wanted to bring to you, it's kind of a counter-example. It's the example of the Grand Canyon Railroad in Williams, Arizona. And I have a link at the bottom to a paper I published a long time ago with a student when I was in a previous university. And it discusses how the opposite happened there, where this resort that you see on that image, it started as just a little railroad station that was bought by a foreign company, an outside company. They came in and they caused havoc with the community, created a lot of dissent and fighting within the community because they wanted to create an enclave. They wanted to create an exclusive place where they could capture every dollar of the tourist. And to this day, that's still happening. And you can Google this place online and you will see it even on Google Maps. You can look from satellite view and you see this big train resort next to a town that's really anemic and is not really successful with tourism. Okay? So why is this important? So very briefly, the destinations are ever more interested in micro-entrepreneurs because they see that the residents complain if they're not involved and they don't want to be always fighting with the residents, and the customers want to go to communities that the locals are involved as well and everybody's kind of happy. So that these Williams, Arizona model is really not very competitive. If destinations can avoid that now, they try to plan ahead to avoid it. So by learning this and learning how to engage with micro-entrepreneurs, you will be so well equipped to service these new need of destinations that didn't have to think about it before. Okay. And then the other reason is that tourism is accused of often generating economic impact, but just for a few people, right? But with this permatourism approach, you have these micro-entrepreneurs, which are locals, and they're all making a little slice of the tourism economy. We used to say that tourism relegates locals to tourees, to passive tourees that are gleaning the crumbs of the tourism economy, right? So the locals would only get the crumbs. And this approach turns that around. The market is ready for it and wants it. We'll give you other examples of this. And you will be able to help destinations accomplish this. Okay, and third is that this approach may help communities tackle their short-term vision or opportunities, of using tourism to achieve development. But in addition to that, it creates these relationships that allow the community then to tackle the next problem or to find a way to embrace the next economic opportunity. Does that make sense? So you're not, by following this process, you're not just solving an immediate need, you're also kind of getting them equipped with the relationships and the structural, like monthly meetings and organization of, cultural ambassadors and things like that. And whenever there's a tourism meeting or a town meeting, more people will show up, more, not just the usual suspects, but more of these micro-entrepreneurs, more diversified swath of the community will be engaged with this giving voice to the planning of that community, right? So this diagram, I'll let you explore it a little bit more in detail, but it kind of confronts the traditional model of we kind of, in a curmudgeon-y way, called it commodity-based, because it's like this mass tourism, profit-only type of approach, in contrast with a permatourism approach to tourism development. And you can see that on the green sequence of permatourism, it aims to finally reach to a situation where this destination is always evolving, always renegotiating. Everybody's involved in giving voice. Everybody's involved in alerting for potential pitfalls, and everybody's benefiting a little bit. And if somebody's hijacking all the benefit, it's detected, and in a civic engaged manner, it's kind of realigned and recalibrated. And so the destination is also ever-changing and competitive. On the other hand, on the blue sequence, you get into the typical mass destination that's now passé, and hotels are all over the place. It's not distinguished from other places. The people that came and invested, they've made their money, and now they've gone on to somebody else, and this place is now destroyed. So, final takeaways. There is a possibility to go away, to move on from the dichotomy of mass tourism versus grassroots, small-scale ecotourism. None of those work very well. Permatourism is attempting to be kind of a compromise or a hybrid. On agriculture side, permaculture promotes the reconciliation of the land with the production from the land. So you're not just sacrificing the land to produce, you're actually, some people like to think of themselves as cultivators of good soil. That's what permaculture farmers think of themselves, and then they find ways to draw a good product out of it. So in permatourism, we're basically cultivating the community. We are thinking of ways to, just like the farmer is making the soil richer, more organic, and better balance in the pH, etc. In the community, we want to have more vibrant art scene and cultural scene and local artists and local historians speaking loudly about their versions of their history. And when you have all of that civic engagement in the production of symbols and stories and culture and experience, then you have a very vibrant destination, and everybody's happy because these passionate people are doing what they want to do, and they're actually able to make money from it, so they stick with it. And so perhaps the key backbone of permatourism would be the word synergies. And traditionally, kind of from like that enclave model and a traditional economic development model, it's people with money and power and vision, and they kind of figure out how things are going to happen, and they do it, and then they yield the benefits, and a lot of people are left out. And so in permatourism, the way we advocate is to create these synergies, because those top-down investments, they have needs, and they have things that it's not worth for them to do. So let's try to understand them and then align a local base of micro-entrepreneurs that can supply to those needs. And by finding that communication, that synergy, then we can advance everybody's interests. Okay, this is it for this module. I hope that this was interesting. Make sure you follow up with some of the readings and resources that I mentioned. You'll find them on Moodle. And we'll see you at the Zoom session shortly.